Okay, so one day in late summer a few years back, me and my girlfriend at the time are sitting in bed, just scrolling through our phones. No plans at all for the rest of the day. That's until my phone rings. It's my sister. She's a wonderful person who we unfortunately don't see often, who lives about 2 hours northwest of me in New Hampshire, on a small plot of land, far up a mountain with a goat farm. She asks us if we would like to come up for the day, see her and the goats and just relax together a little. Feeling kind of lazy and not wanting to drive that far, I almost decline. But she is my sister, and like I said, I don't see her often, so I agree. Me and my GF pull ourselves together and get going, and this is when things start getting weird. An hour and 20 of driving has gone by, and we're nearly in her town when the first inkling of fear arises. Both of our phones are nearing 1% battery. I swear we had them charged, but we must have just forgot. Unfortunately, though, we had no charger, and there's no stores in the area to buy one, so we figure we just try and get to my sister's as quickly as possible. Remember I said it's a 2-hour drive. Almost 40 whole minutes of it involves winding dirt roads, even some class for that lead up to the top of the mountain she lives on. There is nothing up here, houses maybe every few miles, and most look unlivable, all run down and dirty, with junk cars in the front yards and such. But my sister's house is nice, so we continue on. The idea that my phone die before I get to get house is ringing in my brain. We've been on these dirt roads for so long, and made so many turns, I have no idea where to go if it dies on me now. And that's when fear really struck. I slam on the brakes, skidding to a stop on the dusty old dirt road, and in front of me is something out of a movie. In the middle of the road, the only road that leads to my sister's house, is a makeshift wall consisting of 2 large metal gates, fallen tree branches, and rocks, and it is covered in messages. There were signs saying things like animal sacrifice area and don't cross the fence, and hundreds of small trimmings from newspapers put together to write threatening cryptic messages. One of them basically saying, "The cult now owns this land, and if you enter, you better have a gun on you because you'll need it." There were also dozens of pictures of girls, seemingly random ones cut out from books and magazines, but just scattered on the ground at the foot of this wall. We are speechless. We sit in our car for maybe 10 minutes just looking at this structure and wondering if it's even safe to get out and look at it. But eventually, I do. I look at the wall, all its little messages and warnings, the bullet holes penetrating all the signs, and then I look past the wall, down the road we were intending to travel down, and I freeze. I hear large footsteps, off the road into the woods, crunching leaves and snapping sticks. I duck down behind the wall, and I hear whatever this is move onto the road with dirt and gravel moving now. I peek through a small hole in the metal gates, and what I see has stuck with me since. I and my girlfriend swear on our lives it was the biggest human we had ever seen, and when I say big, I mean tall but also wide like Hagrid from Harry Potter. This man was at least 3 times bigger than the second biggest I'd seen, and he was holding an axe. I watch as he turns 90 degrees and face directly down the road, not towards me, but away, and then just stands there motionless. I am mortified at this point, and after gaining the courage, I sprint to my still open car door and floor it in reverse out of there, and my GF says the man in the road never for a second turned around. A few minutes later, after making it a good mile or 2 away from the area, we pull over to catch our breaths and figure out what is going to happen from here. My sister's road is blocked, we saw some insane man, and our phones are dead. Both of them. I want to scream, but I keep it cool as not to scare the crap out of my GF. We soon decide the only thing we really can do is drive the other way and attempt to get back to town without directions. There, maybe we can ask someone where the closest store is for chargers. And after this point is where the more paranormal starts to happen. We drive for a few more minutes, passing a house or 2, and then on our right, a road, East Washington Road it's called. This immediately rings a bell in my head. The last text my sister sent me before my phone died was directions to get to her house, and she specifically put at the end, "Don't turn on to East Washington, it's confusing." And I don't think it's where we turned before, so we just keep going. A few more minutes pass, and there's a road on our left this time, East Washington Road. Again, me and my GF recognized this weirdness immediately, but figured hey, maybe it just looped across somewhere we missed. Not even a minute later, on the left again, East Washington Road, it is getting creepy now, and after the whole roadblock incident we are still very on edge and start to feel like something is wrong. We continue straight anyway, and no lie, at least 7 to 8 more times we pass East Washington Road. On both sides of the road we're on, over and over again, until we reach a fork. This fork sent chills down my spine for 2 reasons. First is, I know we did not come in through this fork, so we must have missed our turn, a turn onto East Washington no less. But the second part is even more concerning. On both sides of the fork are street signs, as usual, except for the fact that they both say East Washington Road. How on earth does the same road fork in 2 different directions? God only knows. So we turn around and rush back up the road, back towards the scary wall, hoping to see a road we missed that isn't this one repeating East Washington. We made it all the way back to the wall, and no, there were no other roads. We must have turned onto East Washington at some point by accident, and now it's the only way out. And at this point we see we're almost out of gas. We decided to just send it, drive down to road, through the fork, and down East Washington as far as it goes, hoping it leads back to a main road off this mountain. We drive these winding roads for almost an hour and 40 minutes. Gas is very, very close to empty, and it happens. We find the main road and we immediately follow signs into town. We get to town center and we park and turn off the car. We plan on going into a small pub to use their phone to call my mom and sister and ask the owner about the closest gas station/store. But things are not back to normal yet. I walk inside the pub alone. My GF stayed in the car. The hostess walks up to me, and before she can speak I ask, "Can I use the phone here? I'm lost and mine is dead." And I kid you not, without a word or any face of acknowledgement, she just turns around and walks away. So I stand there for a minute and ask the next employee I see, a bartender, and they respond. They guide me over to the back corner of the restaurant, where the phone is, and when I get there, the whole place goes silent. This place is near capacity, totally packed with people, and all of them at once go silent. And this silence doesn't feel like, be quiet while he's on the phone to be nice silence. It's very uncomfortable silence. But despite this, I call my mom. She picks up and I explain all that has happened and how we're lost and almost out of gas, and she interrupts and says, "Who is this?" And then immediately hangs up. What do you mean, who is this? Your son, who at that point had been talking to you for 5 minutes. I'm far past bothered at this point, so I leave the pub and hop back in the car. My GF tells me she asked a man on the street about gas stations, and he said there was one right down the road, but it didn't have a store. That was okay, we knew this town, and I could get us home without our phones being charged. So we get the gas, fill up, and get on our way. Feeling sick at this point from all the weird shit that keeps happening to us. The sun is going down at this point, that perfect level of darkness where detail starts to disappear and depth perception gets a little funny. We're about halfway home at this time when out of the corner of my eye, I see strange movement off the side of the road. I slow down a little and look over, and I am shocked. It looks like the ground is festering, like all the dirt and leaves and shit in the woods is all scurrying around in a giant mosh pit. My GF sees this too, and we both are silent, just like WTF. At this point in the day, I couldn't pass this completely without an explanation, without feeling like I was going insane. So I slow down my car and turn off the road onto the shoulder with my lights facing into the woods. And what I see is relieving, but also very confusing. The ground wasn't festering around like maggots. It was actually like 20,000 brown chickens, just in someone's yard and back forest area. Why? I don't know, but it's the most chickens I'd ever seen in my life. Without even saying a word, I pull back onto the road and we keep heading home. We make it back to our hometown, but whatever evil shit decided to curse us that day needed a cherry on top of its torture. We're driving through a big open field, one we know very well, and we see nearly 10 cars pulled off the road, some even into the field. This is not normal at all. Then we see the car heading our direction in the road, slam on their brakes, and immediately all the people inside jump out. Once again, obviously not normal. Then on top of this, they all simultaneously point up into the sky and just stand there, hands up pointed. If this all sounds crazy to you, but to me, in the moment, seeing any more unusual shit this day was heart-wrenching. Me and my GF look up in the sky, and what we saw we couldn't explain, a huge glowing orange-red ball, literally twice the size of the sun normally, and so dim that you could look right at it, and it genuinely looked like it was moving. As amazing as this sounds, at this point we were not pulling over again for some paranormal crap, and we just sped home as fast as we could. Upon arriving home, we get some major relief, but also some more unanswered questions. The giant ball in the sky was in fact the sun. It just so happened to be some once-in-a-lifetime solar event, mixed with a huge amount of wildfire smoke in the atmosphere, making it look very weird. So at least that wasn't scary anymore. On the other hand, though, after calling my sister, she said she had no idea what I was talking about explaining the wall blocking the road, or the East Washingtons that had us lost for hours, said she's never seen it. And even worse, my mom swears to this day that not only did I not call her that night from the pub, but she got no calls at all. Me and my GF were terrified of all that we experienced that day, and told all of our friends, to mixed reactions, most thinking we were lying. This is one of 3 insane events that have taken place in this town. The other involved me and all my guy friends going back up to the wall because they wanted to see it after hearing my story, and just as much scary, unexplainable stuff happened that day as well, entirely solidifying the fact in my head that this town is haunted. The first time my father told me this, it sent chills down my spine. Although we live in the States now, my father grew up in northern England. Anyone familiar with that region, especially cities like York, knows that ghost stories are incredibly common. The whole country often feels like it's run by spirits. This incident happened when my father was a kid. My uncle, who's 5 years older, also confirms the story's validity. Hauntings in England aren't just limited to cities. Old cathedrals, which are scattered all over the country, seem to be epicenters of paranormal activity. My father and uncle were visiting one of these colossal structures. For some reason, my grandparents were already outside, and the 2 kids had lagged behind. These cathedrals, with their intricate decorations, are beautiful and often toured even during off hours when no one else is around. As my father and uncle were making their way out, they suddenly heard a short tune played on the organ upstairs. In a building so large, the sound of an organ is hard to miss. Thinking they were alone, they curiously wandered up the spiral staircase to see who was playing. When my uncle reached the top of the stairs, he turned toward the organ and went pale. He looked utterly bewildered. My dad peered over the balcony ledge to see what had shocked my uncle. To their horror, not only was there no one there, but the organ was also locked up tight. After looking around, they realized there was no other way off the balcony except the staircase they had just climbed. My father described feeling a massive weight drop in his stomach and a sense of dread overcoming him. Both kids tore out of that cathedral as fast as they could. I've asked my dad countless questions over the years to get more context. He told me that even if there had been another way off the balcony, the time between the organ playing and their arrival at the top of the stairs was only about 20 seconds. Hardly enough time for someone to close up the organ and disappear. I don't believe my dad ever went back there. I was 13 when this happened, and it still gives me nightmares thinking about it. My parents wanted to go out on a date night, so they left me home on a Friday night. I am an only child, so I stayed home alone. We had a 1-story home with a daylight basement that had its own entrance. We live on a dead-end street that is pretty quiet in the evening, so not many cars come and go. My neighbors are pretty close to my house too, so I didn't feel uncomfortable being home by myself. My parents left around 6 p.m. for their dinner reservation. I had a nice hot pizza delivered and was ready to watch some scary movies all by myself. I was excited. I locked the door behind them and turned on the TV. I was scrolling through the movies on my Roku app and decided to watch one of the Halloween movies first. I snuggled in my nice, warm fuzzy blanket on the couch, got comfy, and began my night alone. About an hour passed, and I got up to use the bathroom. While in the bathroom, I thought I heard noises coming from the basement. It sounded like something was moving around, but I figured I was home alone. What could it be? So I brushed it off as nothing. I finished in the bathroom and went back to my couch to finish the movie. Another 5 minutes passed, and again, I heard moving noises in the basement. Now I started getting that nervous feeling in my gut. I stopped the movie to listen for more noises. What is that? I thought about that entrance door down there and wondered if it was locked. I assumed my parents had locked it. Oh, I hope they did. I didn't know what to do. I took a deep breath and decided to walk towards the basement and put my ear to the door. What a mistake. I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. I froze in fear. This had never happened to me before. I have been home alone in the past, but mostly during the day. I know the obvious thing to do would be to call the cops, but did I do that? No. I ran outside and went to my neighbor's house and banged on their door. Thankfully, they were home and let me in. I was out of breath, scared, and couldn't get the words out fast enough. I asked them to please call the cops because there was someone in my house. Hurry, please. They called 911, and the cops came over within 10 minutes. I also called my parents to let them know what was going on. I let the cops check out the house, and I stayed at my neighbor's where I felt safe. After some time, one of the cops came over to my neighbor's house and said they didn't find anyone in the house, but did say that whoever it was came in through the basement entrance. It must have been unlocked. Nothing was taken and everything was in its place. My parents got home and, of course, were very upset and scared. The cops assured us the house was clear and to please lock our doors and windows at all times. They think this person saw my parents leave and assumed the house was empty. I don't want to think that this person knew I was home alone. After some thought, my mother said, "Oh no, I don't think we locked the basement door. She just assumed since we lived in a quiet neighborhood, we were safe, so she didn't really worry about it." Needless to say, after this night, we all made sure every door and window stayed locked. They still leave me alone, but they let the next door neighbors know when they do just in case. I still think about this night and it gives me nightmares. I am 16 now and feel a little uneasy being home alone, but I know I need to get over it. Please stay safe out there and always lock your doors. You don't know who is lurking around your neighborhood. For a large portion of my life, my dad and I used to visit the coast quite often. We were avid stunt kite enthusiasts and went to the ocean any chance we got, whether it was a kite festival or just any old weekend. We usually either stayed at a hotel or motel, but a great deal of our trips were spent at a campsite. Due to high occupancy, we didn't stay at any of the places we had gone before and ended up driving around to find this one spot we passed on a previous trip that we thought looked cool. It was a small campground that even had its own cove, something you'd usually only see on one of the native reservations. We didn't know the name of the place, but after a great deal of driving and maybe circling back once or twice, we eventually found it. It almost took a couple of hours, but hey, it wasn't dark yet, so it could have been worse. First, everything seemed fine. There were at least 7 different trailers parked in the grassy lot, hooked up to power and a drain next to a lot more open spaces that looked perfect for our setup, which was just a mid-sized Jayco toy hauler and our truck. My dad pulled up to the main office and had me get out to see if the door was locked because we didn't see much in the way of light from where we were parked. I checked the door and, as suspected, it was locked. There wasn't any noise. I knocked on the door, but the bell was either busted or just disconnected. It was an older wooden building in the same style as many of the other buildings around ocean shores. As I walked back to the truck a bit disappointed, I looked over to the garage that was part of the main office building, and the door was wide open. Still no lights, but a lot of old and new, really expensive tools and other materials were just lying around, some of which were outside the garage. This is Washington in the spring. It had already been cloudy all day, and it was drizzling when we pulled up. Why would they just leave a brand new generator and tools on the ground in the elements for who knows how long? There were no cameras or security systems anywhere, so they could have easily been stolen too. When I got back to our vehicle, my dad told me there was a truck running over at the other building in the middle of the park. I looked over and saw there was also a light on in that building. Thinking our luck had turned, we drove over, and Dad had me get out again, but this time he also got out to stretch his legs. I got to the driver's side of the truck to find nobody in it. I figured the person was probably just making a quick visit, so I knocked on the door before trying the handle, but got no response. Another locked door. At this point, I was just annoyed because I knocked, called out to them, and got absolutely nothing. There were windows on the building, which is how we knew there were lights on, but they were higher up. This building was more like a small tower compared to the other one. I got on top of a stack of wood up against the wall to maybe look inside. What I saw was a lightly furnished and carpeted, almost studio apartment, but it didn't have a bathroom. It was at this point I started to feel a bit uncomfortable. There was no one inside. I started looking at some of the trailers parked around the campgrounds and realized none of their lights were on either. It wasn't until I started walking around that I noticed some of the trailers had been there a lot longer than we thought, and the same with the vehicles next to them. One was practically collapsing in on itself, and another had its door open. The inside wasn't much better than the other trailer. Some of them were older, some were newer. There was even a couple of tent trailers, a Chinook and a Winnebago too. But no people, no one at the beach in the cove, none in the bathroom building on the other side of the office, and nobody manning that truck still running outside that empty cabin tower thing. There was absolutely no one on the premises, which didn't make sense. People were surely there at one point, but they couldn't have just up and left without their stuff, much less their vehicles. The nearest town was about 5 miles in the opposite direction. My dad finally caught on to how weird this all was and decided that we didn't need to continue being there anymore. We ended up going back to where we started and paid way more than what that motel room was worth for a few nights. But what would have happened to us if we stayed? After we figured out the tower was locked, my dad even suggested we just hook up to a spot and wait for someone to come back and charge us. What if I had agreed to that before looking through that window? But more importantly, what happened to all those people? And where was the guy who owned that truck? When I was still married to my military husband, he was overseas, and I moved our daughters and myself to our follow-on duty station. I rented a 100-plus-year-old house. It was wonderful out in a rural area with a huge yard. The only problem was that it had mysterious happenings. One of the things I soon learned happened on a regular basis was the knocker. The basement of the house was very dark and damp. My washer, dryer, and deep freeze were in the basement, so I had to go down there quite often. I never allowed my 2 young children down there due to the darkness and dampness. The only entrance to the basement was a door located in the kitchen. It happened to be right next to the back door, which was also in the kitchen. Not long after we moved in, I heard knocking on the back door. Thinking it must be a neighbor, I went to answer it. As I approached the door, I realized it wasn't the back door. It was the basement door. I knew my children were in the living room and couldn't figure out who would be in my basement. I opened the door to no one. This occurred on a regular basis. At least once a week, I heard the knocker. The neighbors and owner of the home knew nothing about it. I also hung a photo of my husband and me on the wall by the front door. Many mornings, I came in to find it either hanging upside down or lying on the floor beneath one of the chairs or the sofa. I would replace the photo and leave it at that. My parents came to visit one weekend. We were sitting in the living room, and suddenly, we heard knocking on the back door. I tried to ignore it, but my very practical mother insisted on answering the door. I followed her, insisting she just ignore it. She thought I was being terribly rude. Then, she opened the door. Realizing there was no one there, she literally stalked back into the living room, picked up her purse, and as she was going out the door, said, "Mel, I'll be in the car." My father drove her the 3 hours home, and she refused to ever come back. Another time, after my husband returned from overseas, we had guests and were sitting in the living room. Suddenly, the husband stopped talking and stared at the wall next to the front door. He said, "Susan, get the baby. It's time to go home." We followed his stare to the front door and watched as the photo of my husband and me was slowly turning upside down. There were other strange occurrences, and it soon became apparent that whatever it was did not like my husband at all. If he upset me or the children in any way, things picked up and something bad happened to him. One day, following an argument, he left to drive to a local Kmart. He called me from the store. He was almost there when the left driver's side rear wheel came off the truck, and he wrecked the truck. He apologized to me. He called the entity Hardy. He followed us to our next base and left when we divorced. This story takes place on the shores of Lake Simcoe Ontario, Canada, in a small town named Brehin. With a population of just over 800, Brehin is your typical small countryside town with fields, a small grocery store, a post office, and a small restaurant. A short drive through this town going north on Highway 12 is where my aunt and uncle live, specifically on the east side of the highway. Growing up, I always looked forward to going there. It took approximately an hour and a half to drive, which I also enjoyed. Before I dive more into this story, I'd like to state that I was never one to believe in the supernatural or paranormal. However, after witnessing the events I will describe, that changed. I also have no intention of trying to convince anyone of anything. In October 2015, my girlfriend at the time, some of my family, and I drove up to my aunt's for the night to have dinner. We arrived late in the afternoon, and after greeting my aunt and uncle, I quickly set up the tent I brought along to sleep in since there were more people at the house than there were available sleeping spaces. I offered to sleep outside in the tent with my girlfriend. Fast forward a few hours, we had finished our dinner and were gathered outside on the sheltered porch, enjoying each other's company. A bit more time passed, and the sun had set. My girlfriend excused herself to go inside and use the washroom in the basement. Despite my offer to accompany her, she declined and went in on her own. Shortly thereafter, she returned with a look of concern on her face. She quietly pulled me aside, and hearing the fear in her voice, I quickly excused us both. I asked her what the matter was, clearly seeing something had startled her. She explained that on her way downstairs to the washroom, she passed the den, which has an old reclining rocking chair. As she walked through and just passed the den and that chair, she believed she heard a noise. After looking around, she noticed the chair was moving slightly, and rising from behind the chair were two red lights, the size of eyes, which stopped at about 6 feet high. Needless to say, she never made it to the washroom and turned around, getting out of there as quickly as she could. After she explained this, I tried my best to calm her down and reassure her that it was likely just the cat jumping off the chair, and maybe the red lights were something coming in from outside the window. She calmed down, but I could tell she didn't fully believe what I was saying, and in all honesty, I wasn't sure I believed it myself either. I always felt something odd while at this house, but I always chalked it up to just being a nervous kid in a house that wasn't my own. We rejoined my family and tried to enjoy the rest of the night before heading off to the tent for bed. Having seemed to forget the small event that took place in the basement earlier, we said our goodnights and went to bed. The cool October air had us sleeping in no time. A few hours passed and I woke up. I have a hard time sleeping through the night, and waking up several times isn't uncommon for me. I rubbed my eyes and took a look over at my girlfriend, who was still fast asleep. I put on my shoes and made my way to the house to grab a glass of water. After getting to the kitchen and having my drink, I saw headlights coming up the country road, stopping at the end of the laneway, and then proceeding to drive up. It was my cousin, who was expected home earlier but ended up working late. I finished my drink and made my way back outside to meet her. As I approached the door leading outside, she rushed in, swinging the door open violently. I asked her what was wrong, and instead of a verbal response, she raised her finger, pointing at the door. Instinctively, I looked. There were two red lights the size of eyes, inches from the glass on the door, accompanied by fog forming on the glass and then disappearing, as if someone was standing nose to the glass and breathing. My cousin told me that upon driving down the road towards the house, she was hit with a heavy sense of dread and anxiety. Once getting to the end of the laneway, she claimed to have seen a tall, dark shadow standing beside the house, which explained why she had stopped. The feeling of dread and fear quickly took over, prompting her to run to the house as soon as she got out of her car. We talked for a few more minutes before I gathered the courage to walk back to my tent. I quickly walked across the large yard and practically dove into my tent, not exactly concerned about waking my girlfriend, as I felt she would understand. I entered the tent, heart racing, and zipped the door shut after taking a quick look outside, fully expecting to see something face to face with me. But there was nothing. I let out a small sigh of relief, zipped up the tent, and turned around to face my bed and, more importantly, my girlfriend, who was sitting straight up. I couldn't make out any features, but I got into bed beside her under the covers and apologized for waking her up. The words that came out of her mouth next will stay with me until the day I die. There was a short pause before she said, "I almost had her. I will get her next time." I sat there, completely still, not making a sound. I had always heard how fear can be paralyzing, but I thought that only happened in movies. I learned that night I was wrong. I reached over and grabbed my phone to use as a light. I made up the nerve to now face my girlfriend, who appeared to be sleeping, but still sitting upright and not moving. I guided her to lay back down and attempted to get some sleep, but as you might expect, sleep didn't come. The morning arrived, bringing a wave of relief. My girlfriend woke up, and I decided not to bring up anything that happened after she fell asleep. I didn't want to freak her out, especially since we were planning on staying over again that night. However, that would not happen. The day went on like a regular day, and we were all back together, sharing laughs in each other's company. My cousin had not left her room, but no one was very surprised, knowing she got home late and would be working again that night. This was her time to sleep. As the day went on, my aunt received a call from her neighbor. Despite living nearly a kilometer away, the neighbor was still close by. After a brief phone call, my aunt informed us that her neighbor and the neighbor's friend would be joining us for dinner that night. They arrived around 4 p.m. My cousin, who had just woken up and gotten ready for work, mentioned to my aunt and uncle that she needed to talk to them later, her voice full of concern. Perhaps it was this comment that prompted my girlfriend to share what she had seen the day before. After she recounted her experience, the neighbor's friend, whom we can call Jane, became quite interested. Jane, who had experienced similar things her whole life, asked if she could walk through the house alone, claiming she could sometimes pick up on things. We had all finished dinner and agreed to let her take a personal tour of the house alone. We gathered outside by the fire pit, watching through the windows as Jane moved room to room, turning off the lights before entering the next. Soon, the house was dark, and we saw her make her way to the basement, spending much more time down there than on the main floor. She eventually returned and joined us outside. "Well?" we asked, unsure of what to expect. Jane, visibly nervous, recounted her experience throughout the day. She started by saying she first saw a tall, dark shadow inside the house as they were approaching. She had seen it numerous times during the day. It was my girlfriend's story that prompted her to walk through the house alone. During her tour, she saw nothing on the main floor, but the basement was different. What she said next left us horrified. She claimed to have seen and spoken to an old man in the basement, who believed my cousin was his wife. Jane said this old man lived in the house and spent most of his time in the basement. The most unsettling part was that he was at peace until now. Jane said he was furious because we were aware of him now. His anger stemmed from the fact that we had seen him and knew of his presence. We quickly packed our belongings and left that night, not even considering staying another night. For the next few months, everyone who spent the night in the house reported seeing red eyes and having horrible dreams of being lifted out of bed and carried off into the field. A blessing was later done on the house, and since then, there have been no further reports of strange occurrences. Hopefully, whatever was there is now gone. My dad is from a small village in the rainforest of southern Mexico, a very underdeveloped area. There's no internet, no hot water, and people still speak Mayan. When I was 18, we visited for the first time after he got his papers fixed, and it was a beautiful experience. On the second day, a Sunday, everyone in the village went to church. We started meeting people, and an old couple who looked like they were in their 80s approached us and started speaking in Mayan. We didn't understand, so our family translated for us. Long story short, they turned out to be witches who lived in the mountains. They walked 6 hours to get to church every Sunday and another 6 hours to get back. I brushed this off and we went home. A few hours later, they showed up at my grandma's house. My aunt told my dad that he had to offer them something for them to leave us alone. Playing along, My dad filled 2 bags with food and drinks, and they went on their way. But before they left, the old lady walked up to my mom, said something in Mayan with a big smile, and left. My mom asked my aunt what she had said. My aunt replied that the lady had said, "I want to take you home with me and eat you." At this point, the whole situation was weird, and we weren't sure what to think about the whole witch thing. I thought it was over. Around 5:30 p.m., I got bored and decided to take a walk to the river, which was 15 minutes away. When I was almost there, it started to get dark, and rain clouds formed. I was so close, so I decided to keep going. As soon as I reached the river, it started to rain heavily, and there were thunderstorms. The sky was now completely dark, and there were no street lights, making it pitch black. I started walking back, disappointed because I wanted to chill by the river. 5 minutes into my walk, in the rain and darkness, I saw a silhouette about 40 feet away. It was something on all fours, so I thought it was our family's dog, which was pretty big and would often follow us. I wasn't alarmed and walked closer, calling out its name. As I got closer, I saw this thing slowly rise from all fours to standing up. It was pitch black, so all I saw was a silhouette. I was too shocked to react. As I got closer, I realized it was standing up and walking. As we passed each other, I could finally make out that it was the old witch lady from earlier. I sped-walked home and never looked back. I told my family, and they mentioned stories of skinwalkers in the area, though they never believed them. We never saw the old lady again, not even at church the following week. I don't know what I saw, but my guess is that the lady was actually a witch who could skinwalk. This story happened when I was a nursing student doing my clinical rotation in the labor and delivery ward at a local hospital. My class was divided into 2 teams, and I was placed on the night shift team. That night, the OB triage suite was extremely busy and desperately needed more hands on deck. My instructor sent me to the triage unit to observe and help out if needed. Pregnant women were coming in nonstop, and everyone was in a rush. Around 2 in the morning, a mother went into labor, causing chaos as every available licensed individual jumped in to assist. The mother delivered quickly, and both she and her baby were transported to a more controlled environment to deliver the placenta. As the nursing student, I was given the task of cleaning up the room and getting it ready for the next patient. The room was left in a complete state of disarray. I thought to myself, I'm going to need some help cleaning this up. One of my friends came in, reminding me it was time for our lunch break. I asked her if she could grab some fresh linen from the stockroom while I discarded the soiled items. She agreed and walked to the supply closet while I had my back turned from the mess. When I turned back to the room to start cleaning, I was left in utter disbelief. The room was in pristine condition with fresh sheets and stock supplies, ready to accommodate the next patient. I stood there frozen and confused as my friend returned from the supply room. She immediately looked at me and said, "Are you messing with me?" as she stared at the spotless room. I turned to her with wide eyes. Without any more convincing, she tossed the fresh linens inside the room, and we sprinted to the nurse's station, both pale and out of breath. We told the charge nurse what happened, and she just responded with a stare and smirked. This took place when I was in elementary school. My parents found an apartment they thought was nice and affordable, but it turned out to be a less than ideal place to live, as both my mom and dad also had eerie encounters there. My haunted experience happened one weekend while my younger brother and I stayed home alone, watching cartoons in the living room. Suddenly, we heard the kitchen cabinet slam shut violently, as if someone was furious. Naturally, my brother and I were terrified since we knew we were the only ones home. Despite our fear, we decided to check the kitchen. To our surprise, every cabinet looked untouched, as if no one had been there. When we told our parents later that day, They thought we were just making up a story to scare them. But soon they discovered our story was true. My mom had her own frightening experience. She told us that one day, after finishing the laundry, she felt tired and decided to take a nap. My little brother was with her and napped too. I was at school at the time. When my mom woke up, she saw a human-like figure crawling on the ceiling with pitch-black skin. When it turned its head, she saw its eyes were bloodshot red. She closed her eyes in fear, and when she opened them again, it was gone. My dad and I suggested she might have had a sleep paralysis dream, but my mom insisted it wasn't. She remembered my little brother hugging her and telling her everything was going to be fine, and that he saw it too. However, my brother doesn't remember any of it. My dad's encounter was shorter but still unsettling. He told us how one day he heard urgent banging on the door, as if someone needed help. When he opened the door, no one was there. Could have been a prank, but he opened the door immediately since he was close by, and there was no way anyone could have run and hidden in the few seconds it took him to answer. Neighbors who lived next to us before we moved in mentioned that someone had been killed in that apartment, but we never found out if that was true or just a story to scare us. Thankfully, we moved out and haven't experienced any paranormal activities in our new home. This happened during fall break of 2016 when my cousin and I were in middle school. I was in 8th grade, he was in 7th. I was staying over at his house one night, and there were quite a few people there. Me, my cousin, his 10-year-old brother, his 3-year-old sister, his 3-month-old baby brother, his dad, and his stepmom. Their home was a large double-wide trailer on a flattened part of a hill. The driveway was a steep gravel slope connecting to the road at the bottom of the hill. Behind the house, up the hill, were dense woods. The nearest house was our grandparents' place, slightly down the hill to the left, closer to the road. As I mentioned, my cousin and I were the only ones still awake. We were watching TV, probably some sitcom on Nick at Night. We kept hearing noises from the woods behind the house, but we didn't pay much attention since it was windy. Plus, my uncle had motion sensor lights outside the house. One in the back facing the woods, one by the side door near the driveway, and one on the porch overlooking the front yard and the road. We felt safe knowing any movement would trigger the lights. We had heard stories and watched YouTube videos about the killer clown phenomenon but thought it was just clickbait. Living in a small town in northeast Tennessee, where nearly everyone owns a firearm, including my retired veteran uncle, we weren't worried about pranksters. While sitting on the couch watching TV, the only light coming from the screen and the dim kitchen light behind us, we suddenly noticed the back motion detector light come on. We didn't think much of it. The lights were on 10-minute timers and would turn off if no further movement was detected. After 10 minutes, the lights went off. We assumed it was just an animal. About 20 minutes later, I went to the bathroom down the hall. When I came back, the motion light by the side door turned on, shining through the blinds. I thought I heard footsteps on the gravel. Then the doorknob started rattling as if someone was trying to open it. I quickly ran back to the living room and took my spot on the couch. Relieved the blinds were shut so whatever it was couldn't see me. My cousin must have heard it too because he was already halfway to his dad's room to wake him up. Then the front porch light came on. I got up to look out the window and saw my uncle with his pistol and flashlight on the porch, searching for whoever it was. My cousin and I stood behind him, watching as he scanned the area with his flashlight. That's when we saw it. A clown standing at the bottom of the hill in the ditch by the road, dressed in a cheap costume, likely from Walmart or Spirit Halloween. The clown just looked at us and waved. My uncle fired a warning shot, and the clown ran across the road into the woods. My cousin and I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. My uncle stayed on the porch for a few more hours to ensure no one returned. He later told us he heard what sounded like an ATV starting up and driving away. Troublesome kids were always an issue in that area, with houses spaced far enough apart that you couldn't see them. Looking back, it was probably a high school kid playing a prank. But after reading about people's lives being threatened by these clowns, it still scares me to think about what could have happened if the clown had managed to get inside the house. This event happened during the 4th of July week last year. It may not seem too scary to others, but for me, it was a heart-dropping moment that left me with many questions. I'm changing my siblings' names for this story. My family and I had been planning a trip to Vegas for months. There were 6 of us. My mom, grandma, my brothers Jonathan, youngest, and Mason, oldest, and Mason's girlfriend. It was the second day of the trip, and we were staying at Circus, a hotel with a casino inside. When we visit Vegas, we sleep during the day and wake up at midnight to gamble until sunrise. That's exactly what we did. Mason and his girlfriend didn't enjoy gambling, so they went to the Adventure Dome or the arcade. My mom, grandma, Jonathan, and I stayed together, looking for slot machines to play. My grandma has bad anxiety and didn't want to be alone, so we promised to stay with her while she played the Wonder Woman machine. As we were talking, a man who looked like he was in his early 40s approached and asked me where the casino exit was. I pointed and gave him simple directions. He then asked if I could walk him there since he was apparently confused. Naturally, I refused because I didn't know him and he could have asked an employee. After I told him again where to go, he didn't leave. Instead, he kept telling me he was single and that I was very beautiful. I'm a 5 feet 0 inches, 24-year-old female, and quite chubby. I don't usually receive such comments, so it felt weird. Plus, I'm in a 5-year, long-distance relationship. I kept backing away because he was getting closer to me, despite me being with my family. When he noticed my mom and grandma, he asked, "Is this Mom and Granny?" I said yes. He then glanced at Jonathan and asked who he was. I replied, "My brother." After that, he walked away. At this point, my anxiety was through the roof. My mom mentioned that the man was still around, watching us from a small pizzeria. My brother suggested we wrap it up and head back to our rooms. We kept checking our surroundings, but luckily he didn't follow us. Once in our rooms, we quickly locked the doors. I called my boyfriend to tell him what happened. He said it sounded like the man might have been attempting to kidnap me, which is why he was asking who everyone was and wanted me to show him the exit. What do you guys think? Please stay safe and always watch your surroundings. It all started in early 2019 when the first mutilated whale carcass washed up on shore. While it wasn't uncommon for a dead whale to occasionally appear on the beach, this particular whale was different and much more disturbing. On a sunny evening in the middle of July, I was walking down the shore when I stumbled upon the massive remains. It was a humpback whale, or at least that's what scientists later suggested. But only the lower half of the whale had washed ashore, with the tail and back fins barely hanging onto the gruesome lower half of the body. The entire lower half was scarred and wounded, making it identifiable as a whale only by its pale colors. It looked as if something had taken a huge bite out of it. A significant section of the carcass was ripped out, with gigantic scratch marks covering the rotting skin. After discovering the whale, I took a picture and called 911. Authorities came, covered the carcass with a tarp, and sent it to researchers in Washington. This, however, was only the beginning. A local fisherman named Travis was out on his boat fishing for tuna when he saw something moving beneath the water's surface. At first, it appeared to be a shark fin, but it was black and ridged, bony. Then he realized it wasn't a shark fin but a spike. As he looked down, all he saw was darkness. Something enormous was blocking the sunlight from entering the water. Travis estimated the creature to be about 900 meters long, its tail alone 100 meters, ridged, bony, and algae-covered. He stayed on his boat until the creature left, and only spoke of it when extremely drunk at a bar. A few days later, 5 more mangled whale corpses washed ashore, attracting huge crowds and prompting the town council to investigate. The carcasses had to be destroyed with explosives and chainsaws, turning the beach red for weeks. Deep-sea fishermen and sailors began reporting sightings of an enormous shape beneath the water. The pressure from the community led the city council to send a submersible down to investigate. The team discovered the creature at the bottom of the seafloor. It was a 900-meter-long mosasaur-like creature with black scales, bony ridges, and fin-like spikes. However, it had no head. Something else had killed this giant creature. As a marine biologist living in this town, I decided to investigate the matter. The local government covered up the findings, claiming the submersible team had discovered an extremely rare communal pack of great white sharks, which was total nonsense. I eventually found someone with a submersible willing to take me to the location. We planned to examine the dead creature and figure out what could have killed it. On a Friday afternoon, I boarded a 3-person submersible with my driver, Ben. As we descended into the blue water, the light slowly disappearing, we reached the location of the Leviathan's carcass. It was even bigger than I had imagined. We maneuvered the submersible to get a good view of the sliced neck. The cut was clean, not much gore, with scavengers and sharks feeding on the remains. The animal that killed the Leviathan must have been territorial, not hungry, as it had only taken the head. The circular and aligned marks on the Leviathan's carcass suggested tentacles were involved. My immediate thought was a giant squid, but squid don't have teeth, and the carcass had deep bite marks. Whatever had hooked tentacles and razor-sharp teeth wasn't anything known scientifically. Ben waved his hand in front of my face, bringing me back to the present. I shook my head and said, "No, I was just thinking. Whatever did this was territorial. It killed the Leviathan because it was in its territory, not out of hunger. And whatever killed it had hooked tentacles." I was thrilled to land a job at the happiest place on earth. Growing up in Orlando, my mom frequently took me to the parks, and now I was excited to bring my own family for free. My job was as a nighttime security guard, primarily monitoring cameras. The parks aren't always empty at night, and my role was to ensure nothing suspicious was happening. I was ecstatic. I didn't have to deal with the challenges of the day shift, like handling drunk guests at Epcot or entitled visitors who had spent thousands. During training, I asked a fellow guard if he'd seen anything strange. He shared a story about a woman throwing her daughter's ashes on the Haunted Mansion ride, believing her daughter would become a happy haunt she could visit. Let me tell you, dumping ashes at the park will get you caught, and you won't be pleased with how they handle your loved one's remains. One of the oddest things I learned was about Code 999, another Haunted Mansion reference, which we used if we saw something inexplicable. We rotated which parks we monitored, sometimes even covering certain hotels or Disney Springs. Last night, I was assigned to Hollywood Studios. I loved patrolling the grounds, especially seeing Galaxy's Edge without the hordes of tourists. While in my office, sipping on a big mug of coffee, things took a strange turn. At 3 a.m., I saw a Mickey character casually walking toward the rock and roller coaster. Characters aren't supposed to be out at this hour, and most would use the underground tunnels. In disbelief, I saw Donald Duck, Goofy, Pluto, and several other characters all heading the same way. My walkie-talkie was all static as I muttered, "Code 999, repeat code 999. This is Bill in AK. What's going on? Why are there characters in the park?" All I got was static. My gut told me to wait and see what would happen. Maybe more security would come, maybe law enforcement. But I decided to investigate on my own. My walkie wasn't connecting to any other guards. I snuck into a dressing room and found an old Olaf costume. I put it on and clumsily made my way toward the rock and roller coaster. The noise wasn't coming from there, but from the phantasmic area. As I approached, it started lightning and raining hard, though it hadn't been raining before. Characters filled the benches and seats, and someone stood atop a large rock. I sat next to a Minnie Mouse character. She turned and stared at me without a word before turning back to the stage. The intercom crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, here he is, Mickey Mouse." Characters began to bow and cheer. I did the same, trying to blend in. To my right, a little girl stood cheering. She looked like the girl whose ashes were dumped. Hey everybody. Gee, thanks for coming. I'm sure glad to see you all. Now to business. We got this man here. What's your name, pal? A man, beaten and bloodied, was carried in by more characters. It was Jerry, my training buddy. It doesn't matter your name, actually, Mickey chuckled. All right, gang. It's time we offer a new vessel for Walt to dwell in. I think this man may be a good fit. Jerry screamed through his gag as Mickey lifted a knife. He paused, staring at the crowd for what felt like an eternity. He sniffed. One of you is an imposter. Who is it? Shit. Listen, pal, we need Walt more than ever and can't do this with you here. Characters shuffled in confusion, trying to find me. The ghost girl whispered, "Get out." Paralyzed with fear, I couldn't move. Then my walkie crackled. 10-4, code 999. On way double. I turned, expecting to be overwhelmed by characters, but everyone was gone. I was alone in the stands, except that Mickey on stage was now walking toward me, fast, his white gloves outstretched. His eyes were missing. I must have run faster than ever. I had to find Jerry. He had to be somewhere nearby. When I was about 14 years old, it was summer break, and like any other teen, I spent most of the day sleeping in bed. One day, after waking up but deciding to sleep a bit longer, I started dreaming. In this dream, I woke up to my mom yelling my name in a Mexican household. That meant she was really pissed. I tried to get up, but it felt like my shirt was caught on something. Suddenly, I felt a sharp pain in my shoulder, almost like a pencil stabbing me. I managed to get up, but before I could reach my door, it felt as if my head had become 30 pounds heavier, as if something was grabbing it and dragging me down. I collapsed to the floor and tried to get up, but it felt like I was strapped down, my limbs extremely weak. I was stuck there while my mom continued to scream my name. I think it was a lucid dream since I could move around, but if you guys think it was something else, please let me know. This happened to me when I was about 9 years old, back when my family and I lived in an apartment before we bought a house. It was a Friday night. My parents decided to go on a date, but instead of leaving me with a babysitter as usual, they let me stay home alone. "You're old enough," my mom said. "You can take care of yourself." They gave me the rules. No opening the door for anyone, no horror movies, and go to bed at 9 p.m. sharp. I wasn't allowed to watch horror movies because they gave me terrible nightmares. After my parents left, I watched TV until 9 o'clock, then went to my room and read a book by the light of my nightlight. Let me set the scene. When you walked into my room, my bed was to the right, and at the foot of my bed was a closet. If I sat up even a little from a back sleeping position, I could see into the closet if it was open. At the time, I wasn't afraid of leaving my closet open, so it was open that night. After about 30 minutes, I closed my book, turned off my nightlight, and lay down. I had been asleep for about an hour when I heard something moving around my room, specifically near the closet. Assuming it was just my parents returning from their date and checking on me, I went back to sleep. 10 minutes later, I heard the sound again, louder and closer. Thinking it was our cat, I sat up slightly to look into the closet. To my shock, there was someone or something just inside the closet, staring at me. I couldn't make out any details, but I remember the eyes. They were unforgettable. A pair of dim, white eyes with a gentle glow to them, swaying as if floating. I was frozen, just staring back. After a moment, the eyes moved deeper into the closet and disappeared. I can't explain what was in my closet that night, but it definitely wasn't a cat.